God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. And thus began the evening and the morning of the first day. And time began. Hello, welcome back to my series on deception in the last days. Tonight we look at the subject of time travel. The modern day terminology for it is time slips. And there are thousands of accountings of it on the internet. Now, I don't dispute these accountings, and I'll tell you why. I myself have experienced a time slip. So stay with me as I will tell you my story at the end of the video. But in the meantime, let's look at time in the scriptures. The Lord intervened with time with King Hezekiah. Hezekiah was dying, and he begged the Lord for 15 more years. He wanted to finish serving over Israel. And so God abided by that and said, "This will be the sign that you will be healed. I will set the sundial back 10 degrees. And so it was. When the sundial reversed time 10 degrees, Hezekiah was healed. So time is in God's hands. He said he makes everything beautiful in its time. He also said there's an appointed time for every purpose under heaven. So time manipulation is not a problem with God. It's when it's not of God, when it's manipulated by the evil one, that we must be concerned about deception. I personally believe that a true believer is under the umbrella of the blood of the Messiah. But as we put on our armor daily, especially the helmet of salvation, we can be protected from the snares of the evil one. So, the first story you're going to see about time slips involved a beautiful family. They went on vacation in the Smoky Mountains, and this place that they visited was half in North Carolina, half in Tennessee. And it was a beautiful day. Everything was going well until it wasn't.
Now, for those of you who haven't been there, the viewing deck has several routes that you can take to get to it. But the most common way, which is the way that they took, is to drive in, park your car, and then take the mile or so hike up the hill up to the viewing deck. They go, get to the viewing deck, take some really amazing pictures, and hang out for a little bit. And after a while, they all decide it's time to head back. Now, here's where things start to get weird. But as they start heading back down, Betsy's son starts to complain that he feels really hot and that his head hurts. So Betsy tells her husband and the other son, "You know what, you guys just go and explore and have fun. I'm just going to carry him back down to the car." She wasn't exactly eager to carry a 50-pound kid down the mountain, but she knew the best thing that they could do was to get him resting in the car with some air conditioning blowing on him and get him some of his headache meds before the migraine can get a foothold. And right as the family is about to part ways, Betsy makes a half-assed joke about sending the Rangers in to find them if she didn't make it back to the car shortly after they did. She says, "Considering the crappy shape I'm in, they may need to send in a golf cart for us." Betsy's husband and son start down the trail ahead, but they're still in sight, maybe a few hundred feet ahead of them. And maybe it was a lull in visitor levels, but Betsy looks around and doesn't see anyone else around. Betsy's son starts crying, saying both his head and his ears hurt now too, and he covers his ears. And at this point, the weight of him is just killing Betsy's arms. So she puts him down and says, "We're just going to sit here and rest for just a few minutes." They walk off the paved trail and sit down at the edge of the tree line. And Betsy tells her son, "Why don't you just lay down on the cool grass and relax and close your eyes? We're almost there, honey. We just need to rest for a minute." She gets her phone out to text her husband that they are going to take a little rest. And she's startled at how loud her texting sounds. And she realizes that's because everything else around her is completely silent. There's no wind, no bugs, dead quiet. It's like somebody pressed pause on the whole area. or that the forest is holding its breath. The area has developed this ominous, heavy feeling that she can't quite explain. She's afraid to look around because she's afraid she won't like what she sees. Like when you're a kid and you're afraid to look under your bed at night or something. They've been resting for about 10 minutes or so when Betsy gets a really strong, almost primal urge to get the hell out of there and get down that trail. She pulls herself together, picks up her still crying kid, and literally runs the rest of the way down the hill. When they finally get back to the car, Betsy's husband and other son are nowhere to be found. After a few seconds, the oldest son comes racing down the same trail they had just come down with a look of sheer panic on his face. He turns his head and starts screaming up the trail, "I found them! They're here!" Betsy's husband comes into view not even a minute later. She can tell her older son's been crying, and her husband immediately starts screaming at them. "Where the hell have you been? Are you okay?" Betsy says, "What's your issue? I sent you a text saying that we're going to rest a little while off the edge of the trail." Now here's what makes Betsy's blood run cold. He tells her they have been looking for them for over 3 hours. Betsy says, "You're lying. It probably just feels like hours. We were only resting for about 10 minutes. But after checking their phones and the clock in the car, it turns out they really had been gone for about 3.5 hours. Betsy's husband and other son said, "We went up and down the trail to the viewing deck 3 or 4 times looking for you, calling your names." And Betsy's thinking, that's impossible. The sound up there carries forever. There's no way we wouldn't have heard them. After a few deep breaths and some confused looks all around, they all waste no time in piling into the car and hauling out of there as fast as they can. Needless to say, they haven't been back to that area again, and Betsy's husband is no longer a fan of the woods like he used to be either.
3.5 hours of time was interfered with. And because there was such fear and panic and what happened, where did you go, I would suggest that this family did not put its trust in our Father and Jehovah Magen, our protector, our shield and buckler, because they feared. When God is intervening with our time frame, there is no fear. So how do we prepare for this? Because it will come unassuming. It comes without notice. And it's because we're in the last days. Time is a dimension, and all the dimensions, the second heaven, the abyss, they're all starting to converge because the presence of time, which holds all things together on the earth, is coming to an end. Revelation says time will be no more because eternity is now going to govern. So it may happen. Fear not, because you know that you are in the palm of his hand. No one can take you out if you are truly a believer in Jesus and you are trusting in him. Now, the story I'm going to share with you about myself and my husband is true. And there was great fear and there was great confusion. And we know God is not the author of confusion. But nonetheless, we did not know him. And had God not intervened in our case, I would not be here to tell this story. And we would have died and been in hell. It was a long time ago, 1977. We were a military family, and we got a new assignment to go to Victorville, California, George Air Force Base. How we were thrilled. We loved the idea of California. We'd both been there many times, and we had decided we were going to retire one day in California. So we drove out to the coast and looked around. We finally got settled in our base housing, And my husband said on our first free weekend, I want to drive down to San Bernardino. It was a 40-mile drive. He said, because I love San Bernardino and I think you will too. So the weekend came. We had the kids stay with friends. It was just Joe and I going on a getaway. And we drove down the I-15, which would take us all the way into the valley. And on the way, though, we had to go through a pass in the mountains called El Cajon. And so, unfortunately, as military families, we didn't have a lot of money. So our vehicle was not first rate. It needed some work, but it did get us along. He wanted me to drive so I could get used to driving in California. I was a little apprehensive, but I agreed. I needed to learn. So I'm behind the wheel on I-15 going toward El Cajon Pass.
Cajon Pass doesn't just cut through the mountains, it cuts directly across one of the most active fault zones in North America. The San Andreas Fault runs right through this narrow corridor. The interstate doesn't exactly run where the original Cajon Pass once did, but it sits right beside it, climbing the same steep walls and threading the same narrow canyon. And despite decades of engineering, it's still a challenge for everyone who drives through it. The sheer volume of traffic alone through here is staggering. During peak periods, over 120,000 vehicles pass through this corridor every single day. That's almost 44 million vehicles a year. And to put that in perspective, that's nearly 3 times the number of vehicles sold in the United States in an entire year. Of that volume, 20 to 25% are heavy trucks and semis, which due to the grades in the pass are held to 45-mile-an-hour speed limits. It's hard to say which is worse on the trucks, the descent or the climb. Either way, the inevitable traffic gridlock on this mountain make it a challenge for a driver's skills.
And as we're heading up into the mountain, there's a cutout in the mountain, the pass. I noticed there's lots of traffic, but immediately on the right lane, my husband's in the passenger seat, and immediately at the right lane to him is an 18-wheeler, a big semi. I did not really want to be going into this pass with an 18-wheeler at my hip pocket, so I wanted to move left. I looked around, I looked in the mirror, I looked in my rear view, I looked over my shoulder. It seemed clear. So I put on my turn signal and started to move very slowly, move into the lane to my left. And all of a sudden, I was jolted by a loud booming horn. Oh my gosh, what has happened here? I did not see in my blind spot another 18-wheeler approaching on my left. And he was right there. And so I had to quickly turn back the wheel to get back into my original lane. Except, as I said, the car was in need of work and the shocks were not very good. So as I whipped it back, the car just began to jerk back and forth, back and forth. And I'm desperately holding on, trying to steady it, trying to make it slow down. My husband reached over to grab the steering wheel so he could steady it. But before he could do that, the car began to spin and rotate and revolution. And it was like the house in The Wizard of Oz when the tornado took it up. I knew we were going to die. By this time, we are in the pass. It's very dark. I'm consciously aware of 2 18-wheelers on either side of me. There's no place to go, and this car is out of control. I didn't know to pray because I didn't know the Lord, but I called out his name, Jesus. I was prepared for death. I felt the cold, clammy hand of death at my throat. The car continued to spin and then it didn't. It stopped. It just stopped instantly. And I wasn't breathing until then, and I took a breath and I looked and the dust was settling in front of me. And we were still in one piece. And my husband was very quiet. We were in shock. And as the dust settled, we looked, and we are on the other side of Interstate 15, the wrong side of the highway, facing up into the pass from which we came through. But here is the eerie part. There wasn't another car in sight. There were no cars coming out of the pass. No trucks, no semis, no buses. It was dead silence, just as it was in that first story when the mother and her son were passed through a time slip. I didn't know I was in a time slip. My husband and I were quite confused. He got out of the car, came around. I moved over. He got in the driver's seat, turned over the engine, and it did come on, which surprised me. In the meantime, time is passing us by, and still no traffic, nothing. And I had the window rolled down, and there was no sound, not a bird, not a plane, not anything. I could see San Bernardino across the ridge there. We were that close, but I couldn't hear a sound. He started to turn the car, crossed over the median, got on the right side, the correct side of the freeway, and started heading down toward the city. I'm looking out the window and I can see houses, I can see streets, no cars, no people, no animals, nothing. Dead silence. We went on a little further. We didn't say a word. What were we going to say? We were still in shock. And suddenly in my side view mirror, now I'm in the passenger seat now. In the side view mirror, I looked and I saw the first car coming out of the pass behind us. And then another, and then another, and then a truck, then a big truck, then a bus, all kinds of pickups, and the traffic that we had been so caught up in as we approached the pass was now upon us once more. We didn't know what to think or say. We finished our trip into the city quietly. We decided to get a bite to eat and talked briefly about what do you think happened? What did we just experience? We didn't know, but this one thing we decided. We're never going to tell anyone what happened to us. First of all, they wouldn't believe us. Second of all, they'd probably say we're certifiable and we might lose some friends over it. I mean, it's crazy. It's crazy. We never knew about such things as time slips, time travel, interdimensional travel. Remember, in 1977, there was no internet, no social media, no Facebook, no TikTok, nothing. We had landline telephones, and you didn't have a phone that you carried around with you. 8 years passed, and now we're living in Spain, a beautiful assignment, another military assignment. We still were not believers. We were quasi-agnostic, but more New Age. One night, we were in an American community on the outskirts of Madrid, and one night one of the neighbors decided to invite us over. It turned out that he was a missionary, and he wanted to witness to us. So he began to tell his stories, some of his exciting adventures in the jungle, on the islands, in the Orient and Japan and different places. And I was fascinated because we were all military and we knew about traveling. And we thought, gee, I'd like to go there. Then he told us this story. This sounded eerily similar to what Joe and I had experienced that day on the freeway. He had been in some African country and he went through a time slip. And he did not know what it was, but he said, I was not afraid because I knew in whom I believe. And I knew who held me in the palm of his hand. And he said, besides, I knew someone much greater than I, Philip, in the book of Acts, had already time traveled himself. Remember the story when he was witnessing to the Ethiopian in the carriage, and then suddenly appeared out of nowhere water to be baptized in the middle of the desert. Oh, yes. He passed through a portal with the Ethiopian. Then, after the baptism, he suddenly was taken somewhere else. God translated him. That's the word we use, but it was a time slip. Now, I want to say this about time slips in the end times. Time is a dimension, and all of the interdimensions, the second heaven, the abyss, all of them are converging as we come to the end of the age. And remember, Revelation says when that happens, time will be no more. And we will be in eternity. But our protection, so that we do not have fear or confusion should we happen to step into a slip, is that we know in whom we have believed. We put on the whole armor of God to keep us safe. We understand that if this is happening, it's by God's hand, not the enemy. My situation that I went through was also of God, even though I didn't know him. He saved our lives. He plucked us out of the jaws of certain death because God knew the beginning from the end, and that 8 years later, we would come to believe and we would serve him all the days of our life. So be not deceived. We are at that place where anything is possible and most things are probable. With all of the technology coming on the scene, there will be great deception. Time is coming to an end, and so there's going to be these breaches. Be not afraid. God has your number. He knows your name. And so trust in him with all of your heart. And he will give you the peace that surpasses all understanding.